Well, we are going to get started now with our next presentation, and I was really happy that we were able to get this topic into the program because it's one that always causes me a lot of issues, which is how to effectively measure what's going on and what we're going to do in the future once we already have a product that's out in the field. And I know for some organizations they're so used to that they have systems in place, but I know for me it's something that I'm always trying to figure out good ways to do that. And so our speaker today, he has a lot of experience with that. So please welcome Dave Hora.
All right. I'm not going to stand up there. I'll be down here. I hope that's all right. This is a nice small group. So what I want to do today is give you a way to think about UX and design that lends itself to the type of research that we want to do. And then we'll talk about a pretty simple way to get started with this research. Have you guys done usability research before? Anybody? Oh, so we're already sort of playing inside baseball here. But I hope we can get a new look at how you approach this. Okay, intro, audience, goals, done. That's 3 minutes. So it's time for exciting theory and provocation. I want to talk a little bit about design first because I think that when we talk about user experience, what we tend to talk about is the output of design. So we'll go back to 1954 with Henry Dreyfuss, and this is an example of how design back in the industrial design era respected humans. And what you have here is a 50th percentile look at Joe and Josephine, who were used to model the types of things that Henry Dreyfuss built, which were telephones, trains, John Deere tractors, and the like. And you can see that a lot of work went into developing this tool to use for design. And so it speaks to the fact that even a long time ago, the best designers understood how to characterize people for the things that they wanted to create. This may look familiar, even though it was developed something like 50 years ago now. This is Dreyfuss's Honeywell. Just to give you an example of the types of things that he was creating. So we're in a different place right now. We're creating websites, digital interactive products, and that's what, when we talk about UX research, what I tend to think of it as is the research that supports those things that we build, those digital interactive products. And the question is, what is different about those things from a design perspective? And the answer here, at least pieces of it, are the outputs, what we're creating, and also the complexity of these systems. When you create a tractor as a designer, or even a thermostat, there's a lot of work that goes into orchestrating how it happens, but then it's produced and it exists. Whereas here we're creating systems that need to be constantly built and maintained. And as we go more and more to agile methods, there's continual delivery and many teams that need to be a part of what you're building and what you're designing. So, this is Richard Buchanan's 4 orders of design, and he has the orders. I've sort of created this diagram to show that it's an additive progression, but what I like is that it illuminates something about what we do here. So to start, back in the cave paintings era maybe, we were designing in the first order. We were moving around signs and symbols. Graphic and communication designers have been working in this realm for a very long time. We looked at Dreyfuss. He did his work generally in the second order. And the way you can think about this is not necessarily output, but the place of invention. What he was creating were things, and the practice and the discipline he had was industrial design. So here's where we are now. It's the third order, and what you're inventing are interactions and activities. You're inventing ways for people to achieve their ends. And this is what we tend to call UX. We'll get into that in a sec. I have some problems with that as a discipline, but what I see is the component disciplines there, interface design, interaction design, information design, and service design. You can unpack this. I don't know if you've seen the 5 layers, the 5 planes, but that's Jesse James Garrett's initial illustration of what UX is. And I think those disciplines align very closely with what you see in the third order here. And the fourth, which is very interesting, but we won't talk about, it's good to know, is one order of complexity beyond that. So what you're designing, the place where you're creating new things is that you're creating new systems and cultures, and you can see that in design planning. I think a lot of MBA programs now do innovation management strategy, and they're sort of working on that fourth order aspect, is how do we not just create an innovative thing? How do we create an organization that fosters innovation? So, the key insight from that little piece of theory here is that what we really want to understand and try to support are these activities that people are doing. And sometimes it's a really small activity. It's, I need to fill out this expense report, or I need to track what type of mileage I drove so that I can fill in my IRS tax report and get some miles deducted. And other times it's a huge activity. Like, I need to figure out where I'm going to stay when I go to France. And I don't know how that's going to happen yet. And you'll see that each of these little activities are pieces of much larger activities. And so what we want to do here is figure out what activity we're solving for, and then also move up a level in context and figure out how to support or how to deal with the goals of that even larger system of activities. So now we'll try to unpack user experience just a little bit, and then we can get into user experience research at a more tactical level. Here's Don Norman. He talks about it. He was the first ever user experience architect. And I think this was from an interview with Peter Merholz in 1993, but he's talking about the term has spread very widely so much that it's starting to lose its meaning. And I think even in 4 or 5 table talks here, I've had people express to some degree that they're not quite sure how you would define user experience. Does anyone have a clear, pithy statement that they've enjoyed using so far? I'll take that silence as just an indication of being reserved rather than no answers. But I kind of think of it as an emergent phenomenon. It's sort of, now that we look at these very complex systems that we design and we engineer and we deliver continuously, it's really hard to say that you're designing the user experience. It's more of the effect of what you have created, the product that you've built. So I'm going to try to illustrate first what we look at it like now, and then I'll show you what I think is a little bit more correct. But this is sort of I stole a little bit of Victor Papanek's idea. He has a big triangle, and the tiny little top of it says, the designer share. And then the whole triangle says, the real problem. And that's much more serious than the design versus user experience debate, but it's a really good illustration. So right now we have this notion that user experience is sort of the sum total of all this stuff, and your engineers might think that what you do as a designer, if what you're doing is designing, is just the top layer. You're dealing with the surface, you're making it look pretty. And I think the designers would claim that what they're doing is taking business goals and user intent and technological feasibility and melding it all into this beautiful thing that people love and makes their lives better. And that's close, and that's great. So here's kind of how I look at it now. And what you can't see, because I chose my colors poorly, is that there's a light green barrier around this triangle with arrows just pointing out all over it. And I'm not trying to disregard engineering here. We're just looking at sort of the conceptualization and creation of these things, because we know that it takes a giant organization of, well, it takes an organization with engineering capabilities to actually produce and deliver these things. But how I like to think of user experience is that product management and really good product management guides this thing, and that deals with taking the business goals, figuring out what we're actually going to do, figuring out what's in scope to achieve all those goals, and showing that design is a slice of it all the way from the bottom to the top. It's a little bit skewed, and it looks a little bit, I don't know if you can see that. The bottom triangle is not isosceles. And that's a little bit intentional, because I think as you go up to the higher levels, the designer share increases. But this is sort of the picture of what user experience could or should be. It's not the thing that we're creating, it's the nature of what the people who use your system are perceiving. So, now let's talk about how you research that and what that is. So here's the question again. Now, you are building a system, and maybe you're building a system that lets people order house cleaners from an app to their home to get your house cleaned. Or maybe it's just a service where somebody fills out a form that used to be a piece of paper. But if I give you Joe and Josephine and say that it's 59.3 inches to the middle of the 50th percentile American's eyeball, it's probably not going to help you do anything differently or better in this order of design. Or if you can, we can talk about it afterwards. But it's probably not the body measurements. And there's a lot of stuff that I think it could be, And there's a lot of things that people who are leading the conversation in user experience research right now contend that it is, and it's likely a blend of all of these things. And activities are a way that I like to use to encapsulate all of it, but when you talk about the characteristics of people that you need to translate into targets for design, then you're looking at goals at the underlying level. Indy Young is very big in the mental model space right now, which is figuring out how people think about these activities that they do and how they unpack them, and then translating what you're doing to the language and the mindsets and the workflows that they're familiar with. There's a ton here, and we're not going to touch the surface of almost any of it because this is a short talk, but there's one really nice tool that you can use to tie it all together, and I think that's stories. And what I want to talk about when we get into the research piece is that the way that you will characterize a lot of these things and that you will describe the activities that people are doing and communicate to others about them is that you're going to use stories and you're going to tell about the characters of the people who use your products. There are many other tools that encapsulate a bunch of the other different pieces of information you should use, like a persona, for example. We'll talk about goals and behaviors and even some of the mental models and context. But we're not going to look deeply at those tools right now. We're just going to look at how can I approach this problem of understanding that there are activities that people do. I need to figure out what they are, and then I need to design for them. So, we haven't narrowed in fully on this idea of research for the third order yet, but we're getting closer, and what it looks like is pretty simple. People are the target. We as user experience practitioners, I think, recognize that people are what matter, and they're who we need to attend to first and foremost if we're going to make things that work for those people. So you're watching them, you're listening to them, you're talking to them. In the best and ideal world of user research, you're probably going out to wherever they are and just sitting and having them explain to you everything that they do and the way that they think about it and getting to ask questions about it. There are a lot of models for that. There's pure ethnography, there's the master-apprentice model, but we won't go that deeply yet. We're just going to look at the first small piece you can do to start respecting these people and bringing their stories to your organization. So, on the other side of it, it's just dealing with people is the first half, and then the outputs are the design tools, the personas, and the journey maps, and the service blueprints. A really nice thing that you can do once you have these stories is that you focus and align your teams. It's amazing, and I'll give you a couple examples of how a simple little story can show a problem that you've been trying to get solved for maybe months, and then you tell one little story and it just gets everyone in the same line. Same thing, you can find problems in your product when you talk with people, watch them use it. You can get new directions and you can validate decisions. Validating decisions is hopefully something you've done beforehand in prototype in other ways, but hey, at least you're doing it. So that was the exciting theory and provocation part. And to summarize it, good design has always respected humans, and I didn't hit on this angle of it, but some would say that the need to express that we are user experience practitioners is kind of a failure of design to recognize in this order of digital products that we should have always and all along been figuring out who those people are, what they want to do, and what we need to do for them. And then the way that we'll frame how we do this research is that we need to understand people's activities, and we're going to tell stories about it. So now let's narrow in. I picked UX research on live products, and as we were discussing this talk, Joe really liked that aspect of it. And I think there are some really key benefits to having a product in place already. One of them is that you have self-selected users. You don't need to figure out who they are. Hopefully you can contact them. There's some danger and nuance in testing a prototype. Depending on how you set it up, it can alter the outputs and mislead you as to what's working or what's not. So we're not going to deal with those problems right now. We're going to take a really first easy approach to understanding these people. And what I'll give you here is what I've been working on with a few different companies to just try and get this stuff off the ground. And it sounds like some of you have already been doing usability testing, so this isn't going to be new or groundbreaking, but I hope that as we push into some of the specifics of what we've found that works, you'll be able to take new insights and new pieces away with you. So, at the highest level, what this research looks like, this qualitative activity and story gathering research, is that you're going to find 5 people who already use your product. You're going to listen to their stories. You're going to watch them use your product, and that is basically a strict usability test right there, but it's only half of what we're doing. That's where you'll get a lot of clear value for your organization, but to me, it's not nearly as interesting as the part in front of it. And then finally, you're going to work to enroll your organization, because I think most designers believe that this is important, and it's very easy to rail against the fact that nobody else does, but there are ways that you can get all of your people to see this and to get excited about it. So as we do this, the way that I like to frame it for research goals that are devoid of a given product is that you need to learn what people do in your domain, why, where, and how they do it. How they think about it is crucial, especially the language that they use. It's sort of the key. If you can talk to somebody back in the language that they use to think about these things, it makes you, in their minds, an expert, or at least on equal footing. And it really gives you good tools for thinking about how you divide content, at least a beginning, and how to structure marketing, and just talk to these people in any of the channels that your organization has across the user experience. And finally, what they're trying to get out of it, which we could express as goals, motivations, but generally, it's just figuring out whatever that activity is, one context higher. What is this thing that they're doing trying to support? So it's not market research. I like to make that distinction because we talk about this a lot, and people want to know what are the demographics of the people we're designing for. And it's almost the same argument as the body measurements, that it doesn't matter how old this person is. It's not going to help me design for them any better. It's not going to help me get them a house cleaner if they're a white male in the 20 to 24-year-old range. Well, you could make some behavioral inferences there, so I won't completely use that example. But it's not market research. It's behavioral over attitudinal. It's qualitative. Well, okay, I've already said that. I won't read the slide to you. Why? That's really what's important, and a bunch of people have hit this. If you don't know why someone does something, you just need to ladder that why and figure out, when you get their stories about what they're doing with your product, you figure out what kicked that off. How do we keep going further back and getting more of the story? So actions over attitudes is just another way of thinking about this. So we'll start with our example application. And I've been using here the house cleaning service where you book a house cleaning. But if anybody has something that they're really excited about, we could just use it as a running example. Nope? Okay. Looks like we're going with house cleaning. So here's where we get a little bit tactical, and I'll give you a couple story points about where the specific things that I'm recommending are going to work. But this is what I've used to begin the user research program at 2 different companies that until then had not been doing user research and didn't really know what it looked like. And there's some of it's tricky because you can argue for the value all you want, but until you've shown someone what it looks like and what they get out of it, it's really it's difficult to make that case. So the first thing you're going to do is set up a study planning meeting. We're going to look at 3 little activities. There's the study planning meeting, there's the session where you test with your users, and then there's the debrief workshop. And these are all structured so that you can get this thing off the ground, hopefully in, theoretically, let's say 2 weeks from now. You could do all of these things and be done with a first round of user research and then figure out how to repeat it on a cadence cycle. So the goals and outputs for your study planning meeting that you will call with your house cleaning team, since you are making a house cleaning product, are you need to get this team excited for research. And that is really going to stem from your own passion. It's kind of hard to just put numbers or figures in front of people. But if you believe that this is going to work and you say to them, let's just try it, the cost is low, give me a shot to show you, it's actually not a very high cost in dollars, a little bit in time, but you're going to take your team in there. I think you can get other people to believe. So you need to coordinate the roles and responsibilities, and you need to set the dates for this stuff to begin, and you're going to kick it off there. So those are the goals and outputs, and actually I have a URL that you can go to after this with all of these things laid out with some more exposition in case you don't want to take notes. But you need to figure out who's going to be there. I'm assuming that you're a designer, you're a UX person, maybe a product manager, or even a extremely forward-thinking engineer, in which case that's amazing. But you want at least one designer, because they're the ones who feel like they should own the user experience. You want a product manager because they're the ones who make the decisions about the product and are going to help you argue up and down the chain for this stuff. You want to get those engineers, at least one, who can talk about this stuff to the other engineers in the language that they have that's shared, because it's so important that this moves through your whole organization. And you can't do that by just telling the engineers after the fact. Someone needs to be inside. And finally, this one's always a little bit tricky, but there's a marketing analytics guy who's always looking at Google Analytics and wondering, like, what is happening here? Or why is this happening? Find the people who have burning questions about your product and tell them that you can answer the whys that they're missing. There are only a few decisions you need to make in this first meeting. Figure out when you're going to get people. Figure out who is going to be the moderator and who is going to be the observer and who will take notes. Actually, the last two are probably the same person. If you're familiar with usability studies already, it's such a similar setup to what you've been doing thus far. Recruiting's tricky. I don't give a ton of advice here because your situation will vary, but if you email people who use your product and say, hey, I want to find out about why you use this, you get an amazing response rate compared to any other type of cold email or cold call. It'll make your marketing guy jealous, at least, compared to what he's been doing. And then finally, there is the issue of compensation. Issue is probably not the right word, but you have to pay people to come in and give them a little bit of a hook. Expect $50 to $100 per session. So your cost here, if you get 5 people, is probably $500. You need to pick a few responsibilities to get this set of 5 user research sessions off the ground. Someone's got to book the room that you're going to be in. Someone's going to have to talk to the larger team. It's probably you, but it's good to specify that that's actually something that's going to happen. Someone needs to be responsible for getting the money. If you have an administrative assistant who works with you, that's great. They'll hopefully very happily handle it. And then you need to figure out what your equipment and your setup is. If you're testing a web product, it's so easy. Silverback is a Mac application that I recommend very highly. It takes a picture of the screen. It has a little video picture right here with the participant, and you get these amazingly powerful recordings of the session that show what the person is doing, what their face looks like, and especially when they point, it's extremely emphatic because they're right in the camera. So it's a powerful way to share what happens after the fact. And finally, you need someone to handle script and task development, and there's a template that I use that I have in those links that you can follow. So the general rules as you move into this is that I'm assuming you'll be the interviewer and you're the expert. If you haven't done this before, it's extremely stressful, but it's so much more stressful for the person on the other side who thinks that when they come in, you're the guy in the white lab coat with the clipboard. And you're actually just at least it seems to me, a regular person who's interested in hearing their story. So you need to make sure that you set the expectations up front about what's happening in the session, both with the participant and your observer. Your observer probably will just take notes the whole time, and you should open it up to them to ask questions later on in the process. Involve as much of your team as possible. As observers, if you can share it live, but not in the room, once you get 3 other people in the room, your participants start doing this. And they look around and they try to talk to every person at once, and that is not going to work for you. It's going to distract you from the session. And this one, if you have a product manager who's in there and they see a problem or they have this burning idea that they've been working on, the first thing they're going to want to do is talk about what they think could be and could work. And that's not what you should be doing in these sessions. And I think I'll get to that in just a minute. But here's the research session. Does anyone know how we're doing on time? 4:10? Oh, great. Well, then we can go at regular pace. So you're going to set it up ahead of time. Here are the things that you need to set up. You need the room, you need your recording equipment. For the usability study portion, you need tasks, you need compensation, and you need coffee, water, and soda. So you're going to ask your participant when they come in the room if they need coffee, water, or soda, and you're going to greet them. And then you're going to get comfortable and do the introductions. You're going to say, here's what this session is for. I'm going to spend a little bit of time telling you what we're going to do here. We're going to spend a while talking to you about your product. And then we're going to give you some activities to do with this software that you've already used. So get them comfortable, give them the session overview. I think it's respectful and appropriate to give your participant an informed consent of recording form that tells them what you'll do with their data. It's overlooked a lot, and especially in a startup-style atmosphere, people just don't consider it or don't think it's important. But if you don't have that and you haven't set rules for yourself, You're going to keep videos of people with personally identifiable information just sitting on your server somewhere. And eventually, it could get shared out. Someone could put the wrong permissions on Google Drive. The point of this research is to respect these people, so don't forget to respect the data that you record about them. Ask them if they have any questions up front, and then here's this two-part research session. The first format is the story interview, and this is, I think, the most important part that we do not do nearly enough of. And you find that it's just illuminating when you do it. You get someone who's used your product, and I try to focus away from the product. So if we are doing house cleaning, instead of saying, tell me about the last time you used housecleanersondemand.com, you're going to say, tell me about the last time you got your house cleaned. And you're going to ask for a very specific moment. The first thing that they're going to do is they're going to say, usually when I get my house cleaned, this is what I do. And you're going to say, I don't care about what you usually do. I want to know the last specific date that you got your house cleaned. And once you get to that point, you can continually shepherd them back to this place where you can find out the concrete details. And this is really important. It's probably, if you could take away one thing, it's that you should get people's stories and you should get a very concrete story, because they wash over details about what they've done, or they put their ideal selves in the place of their generalities, or in place with their generalities. And you find out that we're doing work with a course booking system, or sorry, a flight booking system, and asking people about the last time they booked a flight. And they say, well, this is what I usually do. I just go here and I look at my calendar and make sure everything's clear, and then I book this flight. But we found out that when we actually asked one of our participants for the last time that they were doing this work, they had a school scheduling conflict, or they were waiting to schedule a course for their school, but they wanted to book the flights. So they found the flights that were right, and then they had to put it on their calendar, email the people that they were flying to see that this is what they wanted to do, but wait 2 weeks until they actually booked their course, and then every day just check and make sure that that flight was still there. And you find that there's all this really interesting behavior that goes on once you get at the very specific pieces that these people are using or very specific instances of these people using your software. Let's see. Story interview. Okay, so that's a brief look at the story interview, and we'll talk about how you deal with it. But then we're doing what I call a product think aloud, in which you all know and love as basic usability testing. The interesting piece here is that you're going to set up tasks ahead of time, and hopefully what you'll find from this story interview is that you get realistic scenarios that you can ask them to show you in the software. So instead of using your own usability tasks, just build off of what they said and introduce the think aloud protocol, and then ask them to show you what they did the last time they did this thing. And that's your usability test, and you're going to start working through that. And just like any usability test, you'll probe on the interesting areas. You probably won't stop them mid-flow, but you'll jot down what you need to follow up on. And you'll get through. And then the session is just about over. So go through those key follow-ups, pay them for their time, and then one really, really important piece that I think people don't do enough of is what I call the retrospective. But ask your participants, how clear was it to you what we were going to do as I set this session up, and what can I do better next time? What can I do for the next person who comes in to make them understand better what this is? Because once they see what it looks like, they get it. But beforehand, they have no idea, and they can help you bridge that gap of expectations and make every session better. And that's probably one of the fastest things you can do if you begin this type of research to make yourself a better researcher, is ask people how you can make it better for them. And then we're done. So the story interview has a few key rules, and I mentioned don't focus on your product, find the larger activity. That's where, for the example of home cleaning, I'm just sort of making this one up, but to give you an idea of what the context might be, instead of asking me about the last time you used the product, ask about the last time I used the home, and then ask why I got my home cleaned, figure out what that level up is, and maybe it's because I'm having a party, or maybe it's because my parents are in town, or maybe it's just because I got a puppy and that puppy trashed my apartment. And you can figure out, based on these things, is this the type of person who might need to clean their home regularly? Is something like the scheduled home cleaning feature that our product manager has been pushing actually going to be useful? I can't answer that right now, but enough of these interviews will help you do that. So get concrete past specific stories. We've talked about that, and asking for details with open-ended questions is really important so that users don't just say yes or no and stop talking, because everything that they say to you, everything that they characterize as what they did, is an insight into how they think about this domain and how they describe it. And all of that is a useful key for you as a designer or a user experience practitioner. So one of the products that we were working on when we started up research was a family locator software for the major carriers, and it found cell phones. And everybody in the organization, from the top down, believed that what we were doing was helping parents pick up their kids after soccer practice. And we designed a number of features in there to support this. Soccer practice is every day at such and such time, so we'll give them scheduled checks, and we'll let them see if my kid is still at soccer or not afterwards. And we talked to 5 people, and we asked them about the last time they had to find a cell phone that somebody else owned. And we found for the first person that we talked to that it was a wife who wanted to see if her husband had left work yet to know if she should start cooking dinner or not. And maybe the scheduled checks would work for her, but it changes the whole conversation that the product has with this user, because every other phone in the product was called a kid. So it went from your kids to your spouse. Another user in the same set of 5, where we assumed that all 5 would just be parents locating their kids, was a couple who had joined a family plan and had trust issues, and had agreed that how they would resolve their trust issues was that they would be able to locate each other, and then they could ask each other where they were. And it's unbelievable that the richness and the depth of these stories that you'll get, and how they can change your view of what your product is and the activity that it's supporting. So let's move on to the think aloud, what we'll just call usability testing here. Predefined tasks you should have ready, but now, if you can imagine, we have this tracking software, and we just found out that someone's locating their spouse or significant other. Here we'd change our location task to show me how you would find your significant other, rather than please locate your child with this software. So it's just a little bit of a switch to get them eased into it and to make things more comfortable and familiar when you're doing the research. I mentioned this already, but don't break their flow as they're thinking out loud unless they're really stuck and you correct them. And this is a lot of the basic handbook of usability testing type stuff, where nothing new or novel is being introduced here, but you really just need to make people comfortable and get them thinking out loud through this process. And this is where you, more than anything else, find problems with the existing product that, even if you don't find wild shifts in context, you have really rich information to share with people. I don't think I have any specific bullet points on it, but one of the wonderful things you can do when you set this stuff up is get GoToMeeting or get a Google Hangout set up and share the screen to a room where people can watch it. And I could only describe it as the tension of watching somebody use your software live is an unbelievable motivator to continue this type of research. I think its value will be shown by the type of bugs that you enter into your tracker, by the type of new design decisions that you need to make as a result of this, but there's some very visceral reaction to seeing people actually using the outcome of what you and your team have built. Finally, this is the product manager who always then just says, well, do you like it? Because if they like it, we can go home. And it kills me, because I've seen it happen so much, and we don't have a great way to describe why this isn't a good idea. And one of my favorite examples is Kim Goodwin just has said, yeah, someone can like it, but maybe it's the 100th thing that they want, when what they really need, this number one capability that your product doesn't do, will never get mentioned or never get discussed, because it's not about what they like or what they don't like, it's about what they need, and this question doesn't get at that. There's also just no cost. They're a person in your office, presumably, who you are paying money to work with your product. And you, the researcher, say to them, do you like it? What are they going to say? Even if they say no, which is great, it doesn't really change anything about what you're going to do. So, here's why you do the usability portion. We were working with Oh, first off, does anyone know what this stuff is? This wonderful bucket of mud? Yeah, so this is what you use to secure drywall, to secure tape to drywall and fix holes in your walls. And we were working with a large home services supplier, and they had a store that we started testing, and one of the questions we were trying to answer was why people don't really use this thing. Why do they keep going to the store when they can order things for delivery? And so we asked about the last time that they shopped, and we found out that they generally jot down a list, hand it to their guy goes to the store, picks it up. Sometimes there's a really weird interaction where the checkout person at the store will call the guy who has written the list to say, I have your guy here, can I put this much on your credit card? And they say yes. And then their guy charges it to that account and brings it back. And it's convoluted, and you'd say, like, this is kind of nuts. And then you have your person who has written the list initially use your app, and you say, we actually had them write down the list in front of us and then say, okay, so let's take a look at what it's like to use this app to order this stuff. And what you're looking at, this sheetrock all-purpose joint compound, is literally, to them, a bucket of mud. So they go into the store and they type in mud, and nothing comes back. And then it's amazing how quickly people get it. It's not something where you can just say to them, like, our search is broken and it sucks. But when you watch a guy who goes through this wild procedure to get this stuff because he types mud into your app and it just doesn't give him anything, it's unbelievable how quickly people get it. So that's where the power of the usability part comes in, especially if you can get them to do things in their own context, with their own stories. So you've done this now. We've done 5 of these things, and actually you should schedule 6 because somebody will drop. What you need to do next is do a debrief workshop. And I think the general rule of thumb to get a lot of value out of this research is that you should plan as much time of post-study work to analyze and synthesize what you found as you took to set it up and conduct it. But here we're sort of condensing 5 hours into first a 2-hour debrief, and then we'll kick some of the responsibilities out to other people. So get this team back together, get all the people who were in your planning session, and bring them in a room, schedule it for 2 hours, and tell them this is what we're going to do. We're going to review the top line notes. I didn't mention this before, but immediately after each session, you take 3-5 minutes and just jot down general impressions and record those, because those are hard to capture and remember, and they can lead to key insights later, especially combined with deep data. So we're going to review all the top-line notes. We're going to uncover the big themes from what we've seen, determine how to address them, and then plan how to get everybody else involved. Your participants are obviously, hopefully you, the moderator, the people who have been taking notes for you, who are maybe also the observers, but there's that distinction because if you're lucky, you can screen share to all your observers, and they may want to be a part of here, and any initial stakeholders who were really interested or had key questions but couldn't watch this stuff. Just watch out. If you get more than 9 or 10 people, you have to be a really strong facilitator in this environment to keep yourself on time. So we're going to do a few activities, and these take probably 80 minutes, but the first thing that you need to do is, obviously you had a note taker assigned in the setup meeting, and they've taken great notes that are on a Google Doc. You're going to pick all the people in the workshop and just give them one participant and have them crawl through those notes. And what they're going to do is they're going to pull out the interesting snippets, like didn't see the big green buy button, used the side menu instead, or typed in mud, nothing came back, or maybe tries to locate untrusted significant other rather than child. So there's all sorts of levels of these little pieces of insight that you're going to pull out. And then you're going to do the standard affinity diagram. And this is, I'd say it's a designer's favorite because you get these beautiful walls filled with sticky notes and it really looks like you're doing important designy stuff. But it's actually really valuable too. It's based on the KJ method, which is, I think, the first format of the affinity diagram. So you're going to do this. Everyone's going to write down all those snippets onto sticky notes. Give yourself 20 minutes for that. Then you go around the room and you put your sticky notes on the wall. You put them up one by one. You read them out loud. Once you put one up, some other people from over here are going to have some, and they're going to say, well, these are the same, and so they're going to put them up. And then eventually you're going to get all the notes out on the board. You're going to have to rearrange them and figure out what the groups are and then figure out how to name the groups and It's going to be one group over here that's really big, and it's got way too many stuff, so you're going to argue with your team for like 10 minutes about how you divide that one up. But you'll get it. You'll get them all, and at some point, you, the facilitator, will say, okay, it's not worth arguing about this. Here's what this group is. And then you're going to turn those into action items. So there are many themes and types of themes that you'll find, but there are basically 3 levels we'll discuss here. There's simple, dead simple usability stuff. So like this button doesn't make sense to people. If you can figure out why that is, maybe the action item for that group is just put a bug in the backlog. But it's something that you can easily address, and it may not need a ton of design thinking. The next level is sort of that insights and opportunities area, where people are using this to locate their spouses, but we have kid at soccer schedule check features. Like, how do we address this? So maybe that's like a product manager and a designer, just own that item and figure out how to come back. And then the third, I've sort of conflated number 2 and 3, but then you have another, I guess, like things that we really need but aren't addressing bucket, where you need to put a designer with a little bit of time and who understands your users and figure out, like, what could this be? What could this mean? It's how you open up new pathways for really interesting product directions. And finally, once you're done with all this, you're going to assign some responsibilities to the people who decided to come to your workshop who didn't realize they were going to have homework. Everyone's got an action item, or hopefully everyone's got an action item assigned to them. One person should cut some short highlights. Usability video highlights are extremely powerful when used judiciously. If you make somebody watch a 5-minute video of a user going through your website, it is boring. Like 30 seconds into it, they just stop caring. But if you have 3 10-second clips of people saying very different things about why they use your product, or 3 people failing to do one simple task that every engineer knows how to do, you're going to provoke them to wonder why that's the case, hopefully get them to move past this idea of, well, we've designed it and it should work because we know how it works and that it does work, and get them interested in doing this some more. Finally, we hit report and summary. At some point, you're going to need to share with your organization, like, here's what we did, here's what we found, and here's what's come of it. So just be ready to have that planned out afterwards. And again, someone's got to manage and secure the data. You can't let videos of people talking about their personal lives and their use of your product just sit on a corner somewhere. So that's the framework for getting started with this type of research, to get at activities and get at stories. I think it's hopefully clear to all of us that your users are the expert. The way that you do this is, it can be very simple. I'm not going to give you an extremely tactical blow-by-blow, but in the next slide, I think there's a URL to the documents that you can look at that sort of recap a lot of the key stuff here. Real user insight really does align and inspire teams, especially if you can tell a story about what somebody wants to do right now and why your product doesn't work, and then you as a designer or product manager can tell a convincing story about how it could work. That's how you move from what's wrong with what we can do about it, because once people can see in a narrative form and sort of believe and feel that it could be right and it could be better, you can get them to start moving in that direction. So that's it. If you have read any of these books or encountered any of these people in their reading, writing, or tweeting, you probably hit a lot of the themes that I have covered here. This is like the super mega great to read for research list. So you'll get that with the slides. Please don't worry about taking too many notes. And here is a URL with all of the documents that describe all of the activities that I said, have the slides on it, and yeah, that's it. So user research is great. I hope you do it, and I hope you've got some good stuff to go on from this talk here. That's my Twitter. I don't use it a ton, but I could. And if you actually have questions or insights or want to know what books you should read, you could feel free to email me at dave.hora@originate.com. Cool. I think we have some time for questions.
So I do usability sticks too, and I was intrigued by that a part of your process is after the study, you do get everybody together for the debriefing, where and you're going to do the affinity diagram. How much time do you allot for that? Because that can be, seems like that
Yeah, it should be probably like a 4-hour deal, but we're not. This approach is one that it's geared a little bit. The audience seems to be pretty well versed in usability, which is great and surprising. But it's the start small approach here. If you haven't done this stuff ever before and you need to get a taste of what it looks like, I think this is going to get you from A to B and get you really excited about it. If you're formal and doing real usability studies already, you're in a great place, and you probably recognize that, like I'd said, if you do 5 hours of interviews, you should tell your manager, we need 5 hours to just make sense of what we've seen.
Well, what I was going to ask you about is, so a lot of times I will just end up writing up some findings and sharing that, and then presenting findings to the team. So there's a lot of, times after a usability study, I don't go through the affinity exercise. And so I'm just wondering if you found that time is so much more worth it than just writing it yourself, and you get the buy-in from the teams that you work with. That's a challenge.
I do believe it is. I think that what comes out of that workshop is not just a set of things that you can do, but a sense of ownership around what we have found and what we can do from that. And I think that's extremely important, especially if you want to continue to push this. And again, you're already in a nice place since you get to do usability studies. I think one of the other things that I found is even when I'm the only one doing a study, maybe it's for a client project that's really small, the affinity diagram method, even in a lightweight form, has helped me find a lot of latent issues that happen to be described in very different ways across different notes documents. So I tend to use it as a piece of the process to find those themes, regardless of whether or not other people are involved. But assuming you can control a crowd, I think it's awesome to get those people involved.
Can you talk a little about selling the value of doing the study? I work doing these kinds of research efforts. I work in an organization that has all the excuses that you've probably heard. We don't have time. The recruitment, we value the privacy. We can't bother our users. Every single one in the book, even when I pointed out that the risks, like for example, we're doing a training that's going to go out to over 10,000 people, internal training, and so the value of the participants' time, when you multiply it across the organization, it's important that we get it right. And so I pointed it, for example, on one of the screens, I'll try to make it quick. They say at the end of the training, they say, be sure to go and read all the manuals further when you're done and learn more. Go to this link, but they link to the top level website thing. So when you go to that link, you have to explore. And so 10,000 people are being told to go read these manuals instead of linking to the manuals for further resource. They're sending 10,000 people off to a confusing, unusable website and saying, you're on your own. And for 4 months now, I'm the developer. I've said, can we do a little bit of usability testing? And I've gotten all this. So anyway.
So basically, probably one of the more common questions that I can never answer quite right. It is situation specific. And I don't think that I have any unique insight into selling the value, especially to a large enterprise. The things that I've had to do are usually just do a study yourself and get those, do the simple task and show what it looks like for one person end to end to go through this. And if you can get 3 people to do that and record them and then show this is a little bit over the guidelines, but you show a 3-minute clip with 3 people each taking a minute, and then you tell them, now expand this by 10,000, you can get that visceral reaction. But the first hurdle is getting the first iteration, and sometimes you have to just be very guerrilla about it. So find some people in the hallway who would be those types of trainees and say, hey, I want you to try this thing, and then just record them doing it. I suspect you've tried all of the monetary arguments that are in the literature. Steve Krug, I think, talks a lot about this, and to us it makes sense that figuring this stuff up front will save tons of time And I haven't found the magic hook yet to translate it other than showing people and saying, are you sure that you want to be responsible for this happening 10,000 times when these people could be doing something else? If you put the onus on them, it helps a little bit. Cool. Well, thanks, guys.